Okay, it's starting the recording. Give me just a moment. It'll now say avoid legal snags by telling people that you're being recorded. All right, so now I'm going to do a countdown. Three, two, one. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to My Liberty and Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Paul Shin. Hello. And I have with me a guest, another guest here for the podcast. And I'd like him to go ahead and introduce himself.
Well, hey, Paul, this is John Hayes, and we've known each other for quite some time, but I'm very happy to be on your podcast. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for coming. So, kind of the premise of the podcast is I ask one question and one question only. And really from that, it leads us to who knows what type of conversation. So, and specifically for you, I had to think about this. I was like, I knew I was going to have John Hayes on here. And I am a music buff, and John is undoubtedly a music buff. And I have to say, I've been to many different venues in my life. Some large, some small, some that are just a seedy country bar. But one of the best venues I've ever been to in my life was a venue that you owned, and it was called the Tremont Music Hall. Wow. And I would just like to ask you, what was it like being a fan of music and being a musician yourself to be able to own that piece of history? Now, I know this could be a little bit of a sore subject, but I know that you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past. And the reason I bring it up is I saw some great artists at Tremont when I lived in Charlotte. And even when I left Charlotte and came back to Charlotte to see some artists at Tremont. So it was a great place. And one of my favorite bands to see there is I saw Clutch. So I was very excited to see that. But I'd really like to hear from you what it was like to be the owner of a facility like that, but also just a little bit about your music and
Sure.
what your loves are.
Sure. I'm more than happy to talk about that. You know, our day-to-day business is yours and mine is one of material handling. And in many cases, your life gets wrapped up in work. And I was very lucky, and I think we've both been lucky to make a good career out of that business, but I was very lucky to have saved up a little bit of money. And when I was a young child, I remember my dad playing banjo and guitar on a swing set that we had. One of those old metal swing sets, if you remember, it had like a not a teeter-totter, but the thing that two kids sit on either side and swing back and forth. And we took all that apart and we put one kind of wooden swing on that swing set. And I remember in the springtime, he would go out and sit on that swing and play his banjo and his guitar. And I was a little kid at the time. And just kind of that memory has stuck with me. And I lost my dad when I was 13. And I think that in many ways that solidified that love of music because I always wanted to play music and I never really got the chance to play with my father. So as I kind of grew up and did a lot of things, I continued to play mostly with cover bands and just with folks that I knew. Never took it super seriously, never learned much in the way of theory with respect to schooling, but later on in life, the music scene in Charlotte started to falter just a little bit. And I had saved some money up, and I knew some people that knew the owner of Tremont Music Hall, and he was in a position where he really needed to get out of the music business. It's a very tough business, and we'll get to that bittersweet ending later. But I was in the position to buy that venue. So I bought that venue, the name, the corporation that came along with it, and that was probably a big mistake, but that's a business thing and not necessarily a music thing. So I got the ability to start in with a existing business, an existing venue, and it was faltering, I guess is the best we could say. But I took this approach, and this is really what I think music brings out in all of us. It brings out the feeling that you're part of something bigger and you're part of a family. And I approached Tremont Music Hall as a family, and everybody who ever worked there was part of the Tremont family. And there were really two challenging years. The music business is one where, you make most of your money in the spring and summer and fall. Summer is a downtime. Summer is a downtime because of people traveling on vacation, but it's still where you need to kind of to do your best to make that money. And there were this first couple of years mortgaging my house and injecting money into the venue to keep it going. I think those are the same challenges most people have with businesses. But in the music business, you learn that it's cyclical and you learn to plan for that thing. But once we got through that, we got to a point where we realized that what was really important was to make the people coming through the door feel like family. And I'm glad to hear you say that. You felt comfortable there and you loved the venue because it was paramount for me. And I guess part of that is because I didn't have much of a large family growing up. But it was paramount for me to have that family vibe there. And even though it was, I guess you could classify it as a dirty rock club, people certainly felt like part of the family. And you could see that when we started the process of closing the club down. It was a very emotional time for a lot of people. And everyone, me included, certainly me included. But we got to the point where people would come just for the environment and to be around friends. And I think that when you have that as a business, you've really got something. And a good example, very early on, do you know what juggalos are, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, juggalos are the fans of a certain group.
Correct.
And I respect them because their paint on their faces keeps them away from facial recognition. So I don't know if people realize that or not, but that actually helps with canceling out facial recognition. No, they follow Insane Clown Posse, ICP.
Exactly, and bands like that. So they are a rabid fan base. And early on in the ownership of the club, when I got there, we had a show, and I noticed some posts very early on. We were on MySpace, if you remember MySpace, and that was really the primary way of marketing.
I do.
And I saw some social media that came out of the club making fun of or poking fun at, I wouldn't say making fun of, juggalos. And I thought, this is wrong. And it was wrong for me because no matter how you look at that group, they are a family. I mean, their whole mantra is, family. And it kind of resonated with me, even though, the greater masses don't understand them or, Insane Clown Posse or the music or or their scene. We adopted them pretty early on, and that group really drove that family vibe at Tremont. And then it caught on with the oddest of musical genres. For instance, one that you would never think was black metal, and black metal caught on at Tremont as well, and became another big draw for us. And it just kind of went from there. So we had everything from outlaw country all the way to heavy metal, black metal, punk rock, those sorts of things. But we were really, I think the thing that really made us most different, and you don't see this anymore hardly anywhere, is that we had a small room and a large room, and our cap was a little over 1,000. And we would always put local acts on with national acts. So it was great marketing and great exposure. And frankly, it was really good for local bands to be on a bill with a national act. I mean, just imagine, Paul, what's your favorite band? So you would say Clutch, I would imagine. You saw Clutch many times there.
I've seen Clutch about a dozen times. I saw Clutch twice at Tremont, and I don't remember the first one. And I've actually gone on to setlist.fm to look at when they showed up. I know the last time I saw them was April 21st, 2000.
So if you think that for a minute, imagine if you were in a band and Clutch was your favorite band and you got to share the stage with them.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that
I
was
can't even
a
imagine.
dream. That's a dream for most artists, and that's one thing that Tremont did and other venues just don't do anymore. The Live Nation venues, God bless them, are still promoting live music and still putting on shows, but they don't put local artists on with those acts because they don't need to. There's no benefit at all to that paradigm for them. So it's a bit of a lost art having local bands on with larger bands. So it was a real benefit to both the musicians and the fans.
Yeah. It's and it was kind of unique. I remember another artist that I saw there. Actually, I think it was the opening band for I can't remember now, but it was the what was the band? Oh crap, my brain is not working right now. It was the three piece out of Raleigh. Um, um, that became famous. Their lead singer still does music, but they broke up as a band. Anyway, their drummer left and started a new band, and he was the opening act. It was nobody knew who they were, but they got booed because they were
Really?
so bad, but also because that drummer had left and started this band, and that's
Right.
why they booed because they liked the other band better.
That's
So it's kind of it is a culture. Music is a culture of love, but it's a culture of respect. And when your audience feels as though you're disrespecting them, whether it's because of something you did in your personal life or how you changed the dynamic of music, it impacts how people think of you. And I don't know how successful that band was. Gosh, what was that? Now I'm gonna have to. That's one thing I do because folks here on My Liberty and Stuff podcast, I am the producer, the director, and the host. So sometimes I go to the internet and I find out what the name of the artist was. Ben Folds Five. When Ben Folds Five
oh,
broke apart, their drummer left and started a new band. And I can't remember what year that was, but they were at Tremont. This guy was at Tremont, the drummer, and he got booed off stage.
oh, that's crazy.
But
We've had so many stories from Tremont. I really should at some point sit down and write a book. I don't know if anybody would be interested in it, but there are just stories on top of stories of really cool and interesting things that have happened there. Some of which are rated G and some of them are rated triple X. But um, artists, number one, are certainly different people, and um, they love life and they love to just live by the seat of their pants. And some of the antics that we would see, just some crazy times, and I would give anything to be able to do that again. I think, unfortunately, the economics of live music and live venues has changed so much that it would be extraordinarily difficult to pull that off in these days. I'm seeing a lot of things with technology that seems to be helping, but I don't know. I don't think the vibe is the same. Have you seen artists now, even local artists, streaming and the app that allow you to tip them as they stream their music? Have you seen that?
I've seen it, but I haven't really engaged much with artists that are doing that.
So I've been doing that online, and there are. I think the one thing that you find that is surprising is the number of insanely talented people in your area that you just would never know. And I'm lucky because I have, through Facebook and through Tremont, I don't know, several thousand friends. I would there that are attached due to Tremont, but to see these people put on a show and the magic that comes out of that is really an amazing thing. It's one of the things that I found was important at Tremont, and I used to go every Sunday. Every Sunday's not true. I used to go on Sundays and I would go, and on my way, I would post on Facebook, hey, I'm going to Tremont. I'm going to play on the small stage. I have it backlined. If you want to come in and play, come on in, and we'll just, we'll jam on some, Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin or whatever,
Yeah.
And, that's magical to get in because, even if you just do a 3-chord vamp on the blues, you feel immediately like part of something, almost like floating down a river. Once the music starts and you get in that groove, it's like floating down a warm river on a nice summer day. You're maybe in an inner tube and you're drinking a cold beer and you just get carried away. That's what music is. And it was really important to me to get people on stage to do that. And we gave a lot of people that opportunity, but I want people to know this. It's not hard. There's 12 notes, and guitar, which I learned to play when I was a kid, has 6 strings, and for goodness sakes, 5 of them are the same. But you can't be scared to play with people. You've got to just sit down, and you got to get in a room with your friends. If you have kids, and I know, Paul, you have kids, get them a guitar or get them a harmonica or something. Get them sitting around clapping their hands, listening to music and singing and getting involved. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than a psychiatrist in the long run. And I promise you, the benefits of music in general outweigh any costs that you have. And my wife would probably disagree with that because I have a condition called GAS, which is commonly known as gear acquisition syndrome. And I tend to acquire more guitars and amplifiers than I need. And I think this is a trend with guitar players in general. But it doesn't take fancy gear and it doesn't take big amplifiers. It takes learning 2 or 3 chords and maybe sitting down with a Beatles song and learning how to play it with your friends. And there's just no greater joy in the world than that. And I think that's really, that along with the family aspect was really what drove Tremont Music Hall. We had such a good run there, and by the time we finished, I think that not me, but the venue was very well respected in Charlotte for what we did for local musicians. And I've got to give credit where credit is due. We had a couple managers, Lisa Barr, who was almost famous in Charlotte for what she did at Tremont Music Hall. And then when Lisa left, Shane Deal took over and did a fantastic job as well. And they allowed me to really enjoy the venue. My role was one of doing taxes and making sure the books were right, but they managed getting the shows on. And as a person in logistics, you would have loved the logistics involved with getting a rock band in, especially a larger one. I think probably our largest show, I would guess, was probably Anthrax. And that was probably a 5-band show. Getting that band in, getting all the band's gear in, getting it up, letting the first band play, stripping the gear, putting the next gear on, sound checking, getting it all done. The logistics behind a rock and roll show are insane. And it's something that if you ever get a chance to be involved in, just go do it one time. Just check it out. You'd be very excited by what you see with respect to the logistics of getting stuff on and off that stage in one night and then getting to the next town. Pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, I had a short run, but I worked at a place called the Sound Factory when I was in college.
Nice.
At UNC Charlotte. I don't know if you remember that place. It was over off Highway 49. And it had some interesting artists that came through. We had Fishbone, and I've got a Fishbone story with Angelo Moore. I got him out of jail. He flipped off a cop, and he had a pocket full of weed. So they arrested him, and I went and got him out of jail. And then had David Allen Coe there, and some very interesting bands. And I have some stories of my own as being a security guy. I was a bouncer, but because the bands that were showing up did not come with their own roadies, I was also a roadie. So I got to set up and tear down every single stage set. So if there were multiple bands, I was doing all that and running security, or not running, but I was working security at the same time. So I got some very interesting insight into music myself. So I can appreciate two bands, but five just blows my mind to have to change sets out that many times.
And it's also interesting you having done that. So to get to know, at least for 4 or 5 hours, these artists, because in many ways they're just like you and me, aren't they?
Yep, absolutely.
You
Well,
know,
except for David Allen Coe, he's an interesting fellow.
so one of the first bands that we had at Tremont, I think the first one we had was Parkway Drive, and that was a sellout, and we were of course thrilled with that. And then I think after that was David Allen Coe, and what happens with a band is, especially a large touring act, you'll bid on the show, and it involves the amount of money that you're willing to pay for the show, and then rider and those sorts of things, and then what you get back is the artist rider after that. And David's was pretty clear. It was no air conditioning at all during the show, or Mr. Coe will leave the venue without playing. And I don't know if you remember the Tremont Music Hall, but we didn't have air conditioning, so we thought that was the funniest thing ever. We didn't have to worry about David Allen Coe's problem with air conditioning. But yeah, he was a pretty interesting fella for sure. Now, are you a fan of surf music? Have you ever heard of Dick Dale?
Of course, I know who Dick Dale is. Yeah, he's
So
one of the best early jam guitarists. Yeah,
absolutely.
Dick Dale was unbelievable. I mean, he
So
still is. I still listen to some Dick Dale on Spotify.
we had Dick Dale at the Tremont Music Hall, and
Yeah.
Dick Dale's bass player had an issue and couldn't make it to the gigs. I guess he missed a plane or something. And his band warmed up and got ready, but Dick was out back in it was a van. I think it was, if I remember correctly, for some reason it was a Mercedes Sprinter type thing, and he wasn't going to play. He was just distraught over the fact that his bass player wasn't there. But opening for Dick Dale was a Charlotte band called the Aqualads,
Yeah.
and they were just rabid Dick Dale fans. So going back to putting bands who loved, these national artists on the show, and the bass player from that band said, "Look, I know every song, I know every lick, I can play every note. I'll step in." So this goes back to Lisa Barr time. Lisa went and sat with Dick Dale and said, "Look, we can pull this off, and we've got a venue full of people." It was a sold out show in the small room, and no artist wants to let their fans down. But I think he was really worried how this show would come off. But he
Right.
hit the stage, and it was electric. He actually let that bass player do a solo in one of his songs, and you could just see Dick Dale beaming, but it didn't compare to that bass player and the experience that he had playing with, one of his idols. Can you just imagine that feeling? Wouldn't that be an incredible thing to do?
I couldn't even imagine. It would be like, yeah, it would be like Neil inviting me on stage to sing Space Grass, which is my favorite Clutch song, by the way.
Oh man, I saw them in Las Vegas. We were at a trade show, the PAC Expo, one you'll recognize.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine was out there and said that there was a kind of a music event going on, and I don't remember the name of it, one of the festival gigs, but Clutch was playing that. So I actually went and watched them play that gig, and they are still as powerful and as good today as they have been for, I guess, 20 something years now. Fantastic band.
Yeah.
And the same core group of guys, which is kind of unheard of.
Yeah. Tim Salt is unbelievable on guitar. He's
Amazing.
freaking cool.
I totally
So
agree.
here's my David Allen Coe story, and this is and I always premise this for all the audience listeners. This is the not safe for work portion. So I was running with security at this little club. David Allen Coe I was done setting up the stage for him, and we were now on the door, and it was like, I want to say it was $20 a head to get in. And these two Harleys show up and park their bikes like literally a foot from the door. And there was a line, so the people in the line had to move for these bikes to park. And both these guys, full sleeve tattoos, and I know the history of David Allan Coe. He's a member of the outlaw biker gang.
Right.
And if he's not necessarily active, but he is like considered a legend for the Outlaws. And the Outlaws were very active in Charlotte. And these two bikers got off their bikes, and they're both toting pistols in the front of their pants, and you can see them. And they just walk in, don't pay anything, don't even look at us, and just walk right in the door. And I look at the other guy I'm with, and I'm like, what do we do? I was like, those guys just brought in weapons. So I lost rock, paper, scissors, and I then had to go inside and go up and actually talk to David Allan Coe and say, two members of your club are here, and they're carrying weapons, and we can't have weapons inside the facility. He then proceeds to say something, and I don't remember exactly what it is. It was kind of unintelligible, and both these guys stopped drinking, turned around and looked at the stage and walked straight over to him. So I guess it was a call sign or something for the club. And he then whispered in their ear. They then turned and looked at me, and I'm like, I am so dead. Literally, I think I'm getting ready to get shot. They then proceeded to go outside. They set their pistols on the seats of their bikes. Or actually, they moved their bikes out of the way. They then put their pistols on the seats of their bikes, like daring somebody to touch them. And came and gave us $50 a head to walk in. And they said, like grumbling under their voice, we're sorry. And they went back in, and they did not cause trouble the whole night. After the show was over, as soon as it was over, these two guys got back on their bikes and they left. Nobody even thought of touching these bikes or the guns that were on there. And cops had come by too, and they didn't say anything, which was, I thought, really weird. So then the night's over. I'm helping load all his gear back in the trailers, and we're done. And it's, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning, and David Allan Coe invites me and the other guy that were running the front of the house onto his tour bus. So it was me, this other guy, and I'm trying to remember his name. I think it was John, on there with David Allan Coe and his quote unquote old lady, his wife. She proceeded to make us eggs, drink beer, and we smoked weed for about 2 hours with David Allan Coe. And I was like, I don't think there is anything better than this, of being able to hang out with, and I know some people would say, David Allan Coe's music is racist and it's this. It's in a certain time. I mean, he wrote these things in a certain time in a certain place because of a certain reason. And whether you like his music or not, I respect him as an artist. And I liked some of his tunes. And just to be able to hang out with somebody like this was just very, very it was very surreal.
Yeah.
So that's the not safe for work portion of the show. But
very few.
Yeah,
very few people get to see that side of those artists. And one of the things you get to recognize when you see artists come in and day out, is that many times they just want some human companionship that doesn't equal people screaming at them. You know what I mean? And,
right.
and
or giving them barking orders at them.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And to have that experience is, no matter who the artist is, but to be treated that way by an artist, to get kind of into that, it's a backstage area, but it's more than that. To get back there and then share time with somebody who doesn't really share that time with anybody else, no matter who it is, it's a bit of an honor, So that's a really cool story, no doubt. I had the same thing. One of the kind of the core acts at Tremont was Guar. Are you familiar with that band?
Yes. Theatrics on steroids.
Oh, absolutely. The thing with Guar, I remember before I bought the venue, I came home one night from a Guar show at Tremont Music Hall, and I was probably 2 a.m. And I walked in the room, and my wife was asleep, and I said, honey, if you wake up in the morning and I'm covered in blood, please don't be alarmed. And of course, I don't know what wife wouldn't get up at that point, but she freaked out and jumped up and turned all the lights on. And of course, I was in fact covered in blood, and it's theatrical blood, but still, I probably shouldn't have said anything, but I'm sure it probably freaked her out. But there were no nicer guys and girls than the people in the band GWAR. Well, maybe with the exception of the band. Oh crap! Now it's slipping my mind now. The Misfits, they were super nice as well. But GWAR would come in, and there was a guy in that band that ended up dying not long ago named Dave Brocky, and I think he was probably the founder and the kind of the main artist in the band. And Dave was so good to the fans. And if you remember Tremont, there was a very small backstage area, but one of the things you almost were guaranteed to have happen after a show was the band would actually come out and walk amongst the crowd. And Dave was famous for this. So one of the shows at Tremont, we used to have barricades. And at the shows, you have to have a barricade between, especially for larger shows, between the audience and the stage, just so that people don't get hurt trying to climb on the stage. And the barricades that we had were left over from, the first or second generation ownership of Tremont. And they were just welded together with about a 3-foot long foot on the back and a standard piece of plywood on a piece of steel on the front. And when that show started, I was in the barricade that night because we were a bit short-staffed. And the barricade, so if you can think about this for a second, so it had 3 foot on the backside where the bouncers were, security, but on the front side there was a 4x8 sheet of plywood. So that barricade actually lifted up off of the floor probably about a foot. So it had enough people on that 4x8 piece sheet of plywood, but the force of the crowd pushing it forward against the stage actually lifted it up. I don't know how that's even possible, but I saw it happen. But that's not the real story. The real story is after the show was over, and of course there was a big cleanup that occurred after GWAR because there's blood and all kinds of bodily fluids that end up all over the place. There's a guy walking around without a shoe, a young kid, and security grabs him and says, what's going on? He says, I can't get my shoe. Like, what do you mean you can't get your shoe? It's stuck in the barricade. Oh, okay. So we go to the barricade, and somehow this kid's shoe, when they levered it off of the floor, got hung between the 2 metal pieces of the barricade that are welded together at the bottom. And we couldn't get it out. We went and got a pry bar and a hammer and couldn't get this guy's shoe out. However, as we were working on it and the kid's standing there, Dave Brocky comes out in his underwear covered in blue. I don't know what they had blue on stage, but standing beside the kid and he's like, what's going on? And you should have seen the look on that kid's face when he realized that it was Dave Brocky in his underwear trying to help him get his shoe out from the barricade. The funniest thing I have ever seen. Those guys were so nice to us at Tremont. There were bands that were just that kind of bought into the underdog status of a local venue. And certainly, obviously Clutch was one. They came back nearly every year that they did a tour. GWAR, nearly every year that they did a tour. It's good to be that part of a scene. And I certainly miss it. I really do. What ended up happening for us, for the folks that don't know, we were in the same building for 20 years, and the owner of the building was in his late 70s, probably mid 70s at the time, and a wonderful guy. And he came to me and said, look, we're going to sell this building. And to be fair, this wasn't the first time that we talked about it. He's probably been 3 or 4 times since I had owned it, and I'd owned it for 5 years at this point. And he said, but I want badly to sell it to you. Okay. What do you think you need for it? Because I'll take $2 million. So, Paul, you know me, and I'm sure you know that I don't have $2 million laying around. So I kind of looked around a little bit, and I found a local real estate agent in Charlotte, a guy named John Nichols. And John said, "Hey, let's buy it. I'll front you the money, and we will then put it back up for sale because I think we can sell it for 3, and then I will give you part of that profit, and you can go find another music venue." And I thought, man, this is a fantastic idea. Now, still scary. I mean, anytime you're on the book for $2 million. But what happened after we actually gave somebody a paper offer, and that's the scariest part, Paul. When you write your name on the bottom of a piece of paper that says you're going to owe somebody $2 million, it gets pretty scary quick. The very next day or the day after, I get a call saying, "Sean, I know I told you that I wanted you to have this, but I got an offer here in my hand for $3 million and I'm going to take it." And I was like, that sucks. But to be fair, the guy was in his 70s. He was cashing out, and $3 million for, a couple acres of property is an awful lot of money. But $3 million for that piece of property as it sits today is probably a third of the value of that piece of property, because it's nearly in uptown Charlotte, and that whole area is gentrifying. If we could have held on, we probably could have done good things there. But who could have known? Who would have known that Charlotte has grown like it has over the past couple of years? It really has turned into something totally different.
Yeah. So another band that I know that you're very close to, that I have interest in, I've only saw them once. But after I saw them, I started doing research on Anti-Scene. And know that you're friends with Mr. Clayton, and I call him Mr. Clayton because he deserves the title of Mr. I didn't realize until after I'd seen them that Gigi Allen was in the band. I had no clue. So, but I didn't know if you had ever seen Anti-Scene back in the day when Gigi Allen was in the band.
So I did not. I didn't. Actually, I was, so just before, probably a couple of years before I bought Tremont, I was at the Milestone Club in Charlotte. And I was there with a friend of mine, a guy if you remember Mark Haddon. I was there with Mark Haddon.
Yeah.
And
he's one of the first people that introduced me to Clutch, by the way.
There you go. Oh, he's a huge Clutch fan. That doesn't surprise me at all. So we were at the Milestone Club, and Jeff Clayton was sitting at one of those tables. If you remember the Milestone, there's a bar, and then there were a couple of little tiny tables along the wall. And Jeff was sitting there, and he strikes a really imposing figure.
He's freaking. He's just. It's not that he's really that big. It's just his look.
Exactly.
His overall look is just. Oh my gosh! There's going to be a bar fight, and this guy's going to start it, and this guy's going to end it.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. So I was with Mark, and Mark's like, "No, he's a great guy. Go talk to him." But I couldn't do it. It was just like exactly like you said. This guy's just going to punch me in the head. I don't. But years later, when I got to know Jeff, he is an amazing, kind-hearted guy who is totally different off stage than he is on stage. And sometimes I wonder which is the real Jeff Clayton. But if your listeners haven't had the opportunity, definitely check them out on Spotify. They are, I guess, classified as punk rock, but they have.
That's so wrong. I really think they need their own genre, because they're not punk, they're not metal, they're not. I don't know. It's it's a unique sound.
Yeah, I totally agree. And they've got kind of a groove to them, which just really separates them from nearly anything else in that genre. And if your fans get a chance, just go check them out, please do that. But after that first initial impression of Jeff, then getting to know him, he became a pretty big part of Tremont, as did Anti-Scene and his guitar player, which was a guy named Joe Young. And Joe Young ended up dying not long after this story happened. But I got the opportunity to play my birthday show at Tremont with Anti-Scene. So that was my opportunity. I am at least as big a fan, if not bigger than you, for the band Anti-Scene. And
Oh, I would say you're much, much bigger. I mean, I still every once in a while will go on Spotify and listen to them, but I
yeah,
know that, I've never had the opportunity to be on stage with them and play music with them. I am still not a music. I'm not a musician by any means, but those are, I am so eclectic in my musical style that, you've named some bands and I named some bands that are like in this rock genre, but I like Ben Folds Five. I love John Coltrane, and I love Miles Davis and Dave Brubeck. I love jazz, blues, rock, ska,
hmm
reggae. Just country is very. I'm very specific about country.
yeah, me
Hank
as
the Third, Hank the Third, yes. David Allen Coe, Willie Nelson, yes. Merle Haggard, yes. All this crap they've got going on now, that's not country music. That's pop. Pop with twang.
yeah.
I can't handle that crap. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, that's okay. I feel much the same way. I think many people do, but I think they're catering to a much younger audience than guys like you. I mean, I think you and I are becoming our parents, pal, which is probably a good thing. It happens,
You
right?
shut up. You shut up and stop saying that.
Right, exactly. Well, the one thing, so I do play guitar and I sing in a cover band. We're called the Dead Ends, but I got the opportunity to play my birthday show, and we were going to play two songs, and I can't say the name of the song because it's like you said, it's not safe for work. I mean,
Oh, you can say it on. As it's considered an explicit podcast. You
okay.
can say whatever you want.
So one was. Oh, hold on, Paul. Let me shut the doors up real quick.
And this is the place in the podcast where we have to take care of our puppies. And I mean dogs, four-legged variety.
All right, Paul, I'm back. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. I gave a little disclaimer about sometimes you got to carry your four-legged pooches. By the way,
Yeah,
you have bulldogs.
absolutely. And we're locked down, so we're in isolation during this period. So if people don't know when this is being recorded, we're in the coronavirus lockdown of 2020. So nobody's really. We're all working from home, and working from home means we've got animals and wives and kids running around. But
Yep.
I got the opportunity to play, and the two songs that we were going to play were called "Today Your Love Stormtrooper," which is really one song, depending on how you look at it. And the final song that they typically wrap the show up with is called "Fuck All Y'all." And I was going to play those songs, so I sat in front of a computer for weeks, making sure that I could play these songs spotlessly. Now, anti-scene songs, or you would think, aren't all that difficult. But rhythmically they're fast. They're kind of hard to play. So I show up that night and they go, we're going to add another song for you to play, and it's this song. Like, oh my God! So now I'm freaking out. We do sound check, and Paul, I've never been so scared in my life. I've played guitar for that since I was in my early teens, and I got on stage and my hands would not move. That's how scared I was for sound check. And this was the revelation that when I talked about earlier, you just need to do it. This was a revelation. This was the time that it really happened. Sound check, I got through it. When I got up on stage to play, my mind went blank and I just did it. And I've never felt more, I don't know, high is probably the right word. There's no drug in the world like being on stage in front of people playing music. And being on stage with one of your favorite bands was just an electric experience. And Anti-Scene is certainly one of my favorite bands. And with that said, we recorded several. One album, which was called Anti-Scene Live Possum. And we also did a live DVD of that same show. So if people want that, they can go to Anti-Scene's website, which I think is antiscene.com. to pick those up. But the great thing, we always wonder if we're going to make a mark. And I think I did, because on this CD, it actually says recorded live at Tremont Music Hall, Charlotte, North Carolina, 2/23/13. And it says right down at the bottom, recorded and mixed by John Hayes. And I can tell you right now, there's nothing in the world I'm more proud of than having this CD here in my hand. It's an amazing thing.
Okay. Have you thought about uploading that onto like Spotify or something else so other people can enjoy it?
It was on Spotify for a short period of time. What I think happened was and I'm not familiar with how the music industry works with recorded music, but I think that the person who mixed it and mastered it somehow had license to it, and they put it up and then took it back down, and I have no idea why, but it is supposed to be going back onto Spotify. Yes, it is. So when it gets up there, take a look for it.
I will. I will. So, John, I got one little thing. I did look up Anti-Scene, and I verified G.G. Allen's connection. And G.G. Allen used Anti-Scene as the backing band for his album called Murder Junkies.
That's
and
right.
After G.G. Allen died in '93, Clayton took the rest of G.G. Allen's band, and they started a band called the Murder Junkies, and they went on several tours together. That's the connection.
So
he was G.G. Allen was never part of Anti-Scene, but that's the connection. Anti-Scene was the band on Murder Junkies album for G.G. Allen. So if anybody's a G.G. Allen fan, which that's a unique group of individuals that enjoy G.G. Allen music anyway, can find that all the music from Murder Junkies, all the rhythm, the bass, the drums, the lead guitar, that was all Anti-Scene on that G.G. Allen album. And then after G.G. died, he took Clayton took that band, the rest of G.G. Allen's band, and took them on tour as the Murder Junkies for 3 tours.
History, my man, history.
Yeah, crazy. I like to bring little things like that up because it's very interesting. And again, I know that you're a music lover, and so am I, and you've got some interesting stories. And I mean, we could probably go on for hours droning about music and our musical taste. But I'd like to thank you for your time. It's I try to keep this to 30 to 45 minutes, and virtually, John, I think it usually takes us 15 minutes to say hi to one another when we talk on the phone. So. I really appreciate you, and I know as a guest, I'd love to have you back, so we can maybe talk about some other things, maybe talk about family, or talk about, I know you've got some interesting property up in the Shenandoah Valley. I'd like to talk to you about that because you did give me an invite, and when this Corona crap is over, I'd like to take you up on that invite.
Absolutely,
and maybe bring some things that go boom, and we can take advantage of that.
Yes, I'd love to have you. So as a former Marine, I've got a lot of things up here that go boom, and we've got 20 acres in the mountains, and we back up to a national forest, so there's nothing at all behind us. We can make a lot of things go boom, my friend, absolutely. And the other thing that I think we should talk about at some point, and I know this is a tough topic for most people, but I think we'll do well with it, is politics, because I think we fall on kind of an interesting side with our views with politics.
We do. And, that's what some people have asked me, when are you going to start talking about your political stance? And I'm like, well, that's not I have a certain political slant, I guess you could say, as well as other people that I've already had on this podcast, but we've never really dug deep into that. And that's because I let you kind of lead this. I mean, I asked you one question, and I think that this is a great podcast, but we haven't really gone to that position. But I would love to have you back on, and let's talk about that as our main focus. Is our political beliefs and what we think is right for our country, because I really believe that it's people like you and me that can make a difference, because it's not that two-sided coin that everybody thinks you have to be a Republican or a Democrat.
Totally agree. I'm available next time you want to have a conversation. I think the best type of podcast is one where two buddies sit down and talk, and I feel like we did a good job today. I hope you feel the same. I'm available anytime you like, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much. And this has been the My Liberty and Stuff podcast, and I have been your host, Paul Shin, with my very special guest, John Hayes. Thank you very much.